to develop a vaccine for it. So again, I keep on looking for more doctors who will be willing to come forward and talk about this. The doctors seem to be a lot more interested in telling us that we can't go to rock concerts and sporting events than they are in addressing some of these really important issues of how to treat this disease when it does get to the extreme. So that's the extreme end. And the doctor goes on to say that this is part of the reason why those who have high blood pressure and heart disease and diabetes, all conditions of the blood, are the ones who are most at risk of having an extreme outcome. If you're wondering what the connection there was, that's what the connection is. And that's why it's important to address it from that end. But on the other side, one of the other things that I think I've been trying to get to the bottom of is why these epidemiology computer models have been so atrocious. And it comes from this idea that because there's no natural immunity, it's a novel coronavirus, everyone is at risk of getting infected. And if 70% of people get infected, even if you have a 0.1% rate of death, that's going to be massively more deaths than we would have in a regular flu season. But here's the interesting part, right? Is it true that no one has immunity? Is that true? This doctor, again, this is in a Medium article that has been translated, so I can't, unfortunately, interview this doctor because he's German, Beda Stadler. He is the former director of the Institute for Immunology at the University of Bern. He's a biologist and professor emeritus. And one of the things that he said about coronavirus is that we do obviously have certain groups that have immunity. If kids under the age of 10 don't develop this disease and don't pass it on and don't end up getting hospitalized, there's something that's going on in them that blocks it. Same thing for those under 19. It's very rare for those under the age of 19 also to have a bad outcome. And so one of the things that he goes through is and I've tried to get into this as well before, is that the body does have a couple of different reactions on an immune response. One is that it's a coronavirus, and there's lots of different coronaviruses. So there are T cells in the body that when they get exposed to this, it fights them off. And so this is what I don't understand. Like the models were clearly wrong. They clearly showed a level of infection that hasn't been experienced in the real world. And yet we're not talking on either end of the extreme. Who are the people who have a natural immune body response and a strong immune system that are going to be able to fight it off and essentially be safe, versus those who are most at risk and why they're at risk, and if they do get it, what the treatment protocols are? Everybody is focused on the wrong thing, in my opinion. And so this is why I find myself increasingly frustrated, is that I'm looking at these doctors who are coming to some really interesting conclusions that are putting me at ease. They're putting me at ease about whether, if I ever did get exposed, my body's own ability to fight it off would be number one, but I also don't have those other conditions, and so I'm not as concerned. And so this is part of the reason I think you and I are at odds with each other about the need for me to go out and wear a mask everywhere I go. But I will try to bring some more of this information to you. There are doctors out there who are trying to bring down the temperature on your anxiety, and I'll do my best to try to provide that balance.
And by the way, the virus, they're working hard. Looks like by April, in theory, when it gets a little warmer, it miraculously goes away. I hope that's true. But we're doing great in our country. China, I spoke with President Xi, and they're working very, very hard. And I think it's going to all work out fine. Rough stuff, I tell you, rough stuff. But I think it's going to work out good. We only have 11 cases, and they're all getting better. But our trade agreement with China... Thank you very much. We're with the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, who's done a spectacular job in Florida. Enjoys very high popularity, and that's for a reason. The reason is he's doing a good job. And he came up, we talked about many things, including he's going to be opening up large portions and ultimately pretty quickly, because he's got great numbers, all of Florida.
All right, let's read this article that Danielle's citing from Medium. And it says, from the jump, the original article was published in the Swiss magazine World Week on June 10th. The author Beda M Stadler is the former director of the Institute of Immunology at the University of Bern. So former guy, maybe probably retired. And then the second paragraph starts, this article is about Switzerland and does not suggest the situation is exactly the same globally. I am advocating for local measures according to local situations, and I advocate looking at real data rather than abstract models. I also suggest reading to the end because Stadler makes crucial points about testing for SARS-CoV-2. So from the get-go, this is talking about Switzerland, and we are hearing it on Canadian radio. So, but let's continue on. It turns out this World Week magazine is a privately owned paper that is essentially right-wing in nature, and maybe in the early 30s may have said some controversial things about, some happenings there. But let's continue to more recent information about this newspaper. In 2000, 2004, 2003 and 2004, it was arguing in favor of the Iraq War. It's more recently been saying that global warming or climate change does not exist. And in 2010, it was arguing that Islam should be banned. And in 2012, it was saying rather offensive things about the Irish gene pool. So this is the source that Danielle Smith is using. Let's continue. So back to the Medium article about why everyone is wrong, right? So he is saying all these people in immunology, virology, epidemiology are saying the virus is novel. First, he says, it was wrong to claim that the virus is novel. Second, it was even more wrong to claim that the population would not already have some immunity to the virus. Thirdly, it was crowning stupidity that someone could have COVID without any symptoms at all, or even pass the disease without showing any symptoms whatsoever. But let's look at this one by one. So he's going to break it out by one point. So he says the coronavirus isn't all that new, but merely a seasonal cold virus that mutated and disappears in the summer, as all cold viruses do, which is what we're observing globally right now. Flu viruses mutate significantly more, by the way, and nobody would ever claim that a new flu virus strain was completely novel. Many veterinary doctors were therefore annoyed by this claim of novelty, as they've been vaccinating cats, dogs, pigs, and cows for many years against coronaviruses. First, nobody's saying that this is the first coronavirus, but obviously it's novel in the sense that this bullshit wasn't happening last year. I don't know what his mental block here is, but clearly this is new from that angle, and I haven't seen anyone suggest any otherwise. But let's reread this first sentence. He's saying COVID isn't all new, but merely a seasonal cold virus that mutated and disappears in the summer. He wrote this, and it was published on June 10th. And in the middle of July, we've seen what happened in Arizona and Florida and California and Texas. And we know what the numbers are like past Memorial Day and past Independence Day. And anyways, Canadian Talk Radio is talking about this Medium post that predicted this to disappear in the summer. So we are in the middle of the summer, and we are still apparently citing this Medium post. The fairy tale, this crazy guy continues, the fairy tale of no immunity. A study by John P. Ioannidis of Stanford University, according to the Einstein Foundation in Berlin, one of the 10 most cited scientists, showed that immunity against SARS-CoV-2 measured in the form of antibodies much higher than previously thought. Ioannidis is certainly not a conspiracy theorist who just wants to swim against the stream. Nonetheless, he's now being criticized because the antibody tests used were not extremely precise. So let's get into that in a bit. With that, his critics admit they do not have such tests yet, and aside, John P. Ioannidis is such a scientific heavyweight that all German virologists combined are lightweight in comparison. So let's get into what this is saying. This guy, this John Ioannidis guy, is smarter than all the virologists in Germany, right? So this is his claim. So So let's go back to what some Americans think. Let's get into this professor of statistics at Columbia, Andrew Gelman, has to say about Sean Ianni's paper. I think and the paper was about antibody rates in California. I think the authors of the above linked paper, John P. Ioannidis, owe us all an apology. We wasted time and effort discussing this paper, whose main selling point was some numbers that were essentially the product of a statistical error. I'm serious about the apology. Everyone makes mistakes. I don't think the authors need to apologize just because they screwed up. I think they need to apologize because they were avoidable screw-ups. They're the kind of screw-ups that happen if you want to leap out with an exciting finding and you don't look too carefully at what you might have done wrong. So he just tore this paper apart, and this paper was essentially the entire backing behind this Medium post that got translated from this crazy Swiss newspaper, and it's it's July 15th, and Canadian Talk Radio is talking about as if this is somehow insightful. But let's go back to the Medium post. And it continues, the failure of the modelers. Epidemiologists also fell for the myth that there were no immunity in the population. They also didn't want to believe that coronaviruses were seasonal cold viruses that would disappear in the summer. He's saying it again. He's saying it's going to disappear in the summer. It's the summer, and it hasn't disappeared. Otherwise, their curve models would look differently. When the initial worst case scenarios didn't come true anywhere, I mean they did. Some still cling to the models predicting a second wave. We are we're still in the first wave, and it sucks. Let's leave them their hopes. I've never seen a scientific branch that maneuvered itself so much on the offside. I have also not yet understood why epidemiologists were so much more interested in the number of deaths rather than the numbers that could be saved. This doesn't even make sense as a sentence, right? So if you're trying to predict how many people are going to die, the flip side of that is you're talking about how many injuries you can mitigate. So it's just, these are just weasel words. This is a word salad. And then he continues, what now? He's saying the virus is gone for now. It will probably come back in winter, but it won't be a second wave, but just a cold. So he's saying it's gone for now. Maybe that's true in Switzerland, right? But it's not true in America, right? And it's still not true completely in Switzerland, even in July. But he continues, those young and healthy people who currently walk around with a mask on their faces would be better off wearing a helmet instead, because the risk of something falling on their head is greater than that of getting a serious case of COVID. So if you look at the numbers, there's about 6,000 deaths in pedestrians and cyclists every year in the United States, right? So there's 140,000 right now coronavirus deaths. So it's very plausible that 6,000 of those 140,000 were previously healthy people or people that regarded themselves as healthy. So, but this highlighted sentence is why Danielle Smith is not going to wear a mask, right? Or thinks she's pleased to hear that she might have some immunity to this virus, but it anyways doesn't matter, because the primary problem is if she gets sick, she is a disease vector for other people that are more vulnerable. But I don't know if there's a reading comprehension thing here or what. And then he continues, if we observe a significant rise in infections in 14 days after the Swiss relaxed lockdown, we'd at least know that one of the measures was useful. Other than that, I recommend John Ioannidis lays the words in which he describes the global situation based on the data May 1st, 2020. People below 65 years old make up 0.6 to 2.6 of all fatal COVID cases. To get on top of the pandemic, we need a strategy of merely concentrated on the protection of at-risk people over 65. If that's the opinion of a top expert, a second lockdown is simply a no-go. Okay, so he's citing this Ioannidis guy that has bogus statistics, according to another professor of statistics professor of statistics at Columbia. And then he's saying we need to isolate protection of people over 65. But what's not elaborated on is how that's even possible. How do you segment the population such that the vulnerable people get more protections? You can't. If a healthy person listening to conservative talk radio gets sick, they are going to visit their family members. They're going to visit, a diabetic friend or a friend with a heart condition. The whole point is the people in the 20, 30 something group are inevitably going to make contact with vulnerable populations. It's inevitable. On our way back to normal, he continues, it would be good for us citizens if a few scaremongers apologized, such as doctors who wanted to triage the over 80-year-old COVID patients in order to stop ventilating them. Also, media that kept showing alarmist videos of Italian hospitals illustrates a situation that as such didn't exist. All politicians were calling for testing without even knowing what the test actually measures. And the federal government, for an app, they'll never get to work, and it will warn me if someone near me is positive, even if they're not infectious. So he wants the scaremongers, quote unquote, to apologize to him for getting the model wrong, but he will not apologize for saying this is all going to be over in the summer. So I would suppose that he owes an apology to, I don't know, literally everyone in Florida, or all the other people that said, like the president that said this would be over by April. I'm not sure why these people that were thinking about triage in the worst possible scenarios should be apologized for anything if this guy so underestimated his own numbers. In winter, when the flu and other colds make the rounds again, we can go back to kissing each other a little less, and we should wash our hands even without a virus present. And people who will get sick nonetheless can then don their masks to show others that what they've learned from this pandemic. I'm not sure if he's saying that mask usage is virtual signaling. I'm not sure what the hell he's saying. If we still haven't learned to protect our at-risk groups, then we'll have to wait for a vaccine that will hopefully also be effective at protecting at-risk people. So he doesn't elaborate on how you, like, from a social perspective, focus on at-risk groups. He just goes on to, we should kiss each other a little less. I mean, this is ridiculous. I don't even know. So let's go back to, who will Danielle trust? Danielle could be citing Anthony Fauci, or she could be citing an unemployed guy who said that COVID would be gone by now, writing in a blog post translated from a racist Swiss newspaper. I'm not saying Danielle Smith is a racist or a bigot or whatever. I'm saying she's incapable of reading her own sources in the middle of July. All right.
Sports heroes, young people that are clean and honorable and out there setting the pace. I think of Dr. Fauci. Probably never heard of him. Well, you did. Ann heard him. He's a very fine research, top doctor at National Institute of Health, working hard doing something about research on this disease of AIDS.
Dr. Osterholm, let me start with you. Is there any way we avoid what some people thought was alarmist a few weeks ago when Dr. Fauci said he was worried about 100,000 cases a day? Is it inevitable at this point that that's where we're headed in a couple of weeks?
Well, to put it into perspective, again, we look at where we've been. We have probably infected between 7 and 8% of the U.S. population to date. That's it. For all the pain, suffering, death, economic disruption, that's it. As we've talked about on this very show, this virus won't slow down even, let alone stop transmission until we get to 50 or 60%. To put that into some kind of perspective, Chuck, if we had 65,000 to 70,000 cases a day for the next 365 days, it would just begin to get us to that level. So we have a lot of human wood to burn in this coronavirus forest fire. And, we may see ups and downs in communities where people do take more concern for a moment because of the severe problems. But I think it's not only likely we're going to see much more than 100,000, but I don't think people understand if we don't change our ways, we are in for the next year of those very kinds of numbers.
Why are we doing so poorly? Well, it's certainly the case that when you compare our experience with Europe, which your numbers just did, We basically did a good job in New York and New Jersey and Connecticut with that terrible crisis that happened and took many lives, which we should never sort of pass by without saying what a terrible tragedy that has been. And basically steps were put in place, and if you look to see what's happening now in those areas, they came down very close to zero. But meanwhile, the rest of the country, perhaps imagining this was just a New York problem, kind of went about their business, didn't really pay that much attention to CDC's recommendations about the phases necessary to open up safely, and jumped over some of those hoops. And people started congregating and not wearing masks and feeling like it's over and maybe summer it'll all go away. And now here we are, not only with 70,000 new cases almost every day, but from my perspective also quite concerning the number of hospitalizations, which is very close to being as high in the country as it was back in April. So yeah, we got to really double down here. And I hope today, Chuck, we can talk about things that bring us together, not things that divide us. We Americans are pretty good at rising to a crisis. We got one now.
Right.
Let's see what we can do together.